So my name is Sameera Kapasi. I'm the Director of Insights and Analytics here at Nerdery. And with me is Bridget Potocki. She is a Senior Insights Analyst on our team, and both of us are extremely passionate about what we do, both insights and analytics. And we're here to just share our perspective on how you can get the most of your data, really the building block to what you can do within your organization. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the session today, we have a variety of topics to cover within this today. The first thing is that we want to really help and identify and talk about how do you identify and manage data and really harnessing what you already have. The next thing we'll be talking about is what it really means to be an insights-driven organization. I know that the word data is really used frequently within organizations, but our goal over here is to really shift the mindset from being data-driven to insights-driven, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The next thing we'll talk about is where insights fits into the product lifecycle. As Hallie said, we have a couple of more webinars coming up to really build on this idea of a product mindset. But insights is really the first step towards that mindset. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Drafting goals for insights work. So that's really how do you get started? And then finally, supporting an insights practice. How do you build momentum within your organization to actually become an insights-driven organization? So we'll try and get through as much as we can and really look forward to your questions at the end. So next slide, please. So we'll start with getting to know your data. On this slide, what we've tried to do is that we've tried to present different sources of data. So when you think about data, it's not just focused on operational or business data, or is just not focused on your customer data. There are a variety of sources that come into play when you begin to start understanding data within your organization. So operational or business data typically talks about financial data or any kind of business outcomes driven metrics, revenue, growth, productivity, operating margin. This is all your operational business data, which your company has been harnessing for a while. This also has to be tied to your business objectives, your strategic objectives, and there are key performance indicators that also tie to those objectives. However, the other aspects of the data that really builds your data strategy is product data. And what I mean by product data is that if you have a digital platform or you have a physical product, what are the different interactions within a digital product or a service that you can begin to gather that starts forming the foundation of understanding the products that you are providing to your end users? There are also financial outcomes that are tied to this product data when you think about conversion rates or ad or revenue. So these are important elements to bucket within the product data. Then you have customer data, which we all are familiar with when it comes to customer satisfaction data, or when you do specific kind of quantitative studies, long-term longitudinal studies to really understand attitudes, usages, perceptions. You might also have secondary data about customers from syndicated data or industry trends that you've been gathering. So each of these buckets by themselves are very useful, but they all come together when you really try and define a data strategy. And a data strategy, we believe, is the first step to get to know your data. Because as you're building the data strategy, you're trying to build a cohesive story around what are the different sources of data, who's using that data, how often it is used, who are the owners of the data. And so putting all this information together really helps you understand the amount of data that you have internally, but also which pieces of the data are most important for you to continually harness and make decisions out of it. So I believe the data strategy is definitely the first step into this process. So next slide, please. So now we'll be discussing what really happens when you're evaluating this data. Certainly, I can say this, that when Bridget and I and the rest of my team are working on building a data strategy, we know that we might not have access to all the data, or we might not have every piece of data squared away, right? But what we try to do is whatever data we have, we try to put it in a structure and begin to evaluate the data. So when you think about evaluating the data, the process really is called data governance. We are taking a step back and assessing the magnitude of data that you have. And so it first begins with assessing the current state. Before we go down the path of determining what we're going to do with the data, we just need to understand what we have today. How is data being used? Which pieces of data are interrelated? And then what are the challenges that we are really facing in harnessing this data appropriately? Then we define business objectives, and business objectives help us connect the data to business needs. And what I mean by business objectives is that it can't be grow sales, but it has to be something that is tied to the overall enterprise level or product level strategy. And then you can start understanding, okay, if these are the decisions that need to be made, what pieces of data are most important to help me make those decisions? But also, who is responsible of using this data? So roles and responsibilities for stakeholders is extremely important, because when something is broken within your data strategy, you need to have the right subject matter expert that you can go to and lean on to actually fix that issue, so that you can continue to harness that data to make decisions. And then finally, create a data strategy. Like I said in the previous slide, there are various sources of data that will be available to you, but it only makes sense if you can take action against it. And so building a data strategy really helps steer your data to your business objectives, but it also looks at the underlying technologies. So what we try to do is, we just don't focus on the front end, we also focus at the back end, meaning, do we have the right plumbing within our platforms to actually be able to harness the data? We call that data architecture, and we have a data architecture and engineering team within Nerdery that works very, very closely with the insights and analytics team to really understand, okay, if this is a strategy we are building, how are the users going to be able to access the data easily? And that is when we start having conversations on data warehouse, data lake. Should we, relook at the architecture? Are there new investments they need to make in technical platforms and resources to continue to harness that data? Okay. So the next slide, we just wanted to provide caution. We hear this a lot from a lot of the clients that they're sitting on a lot of data. They don't know what to do with it. And so while they're building a data strategy, what typically tends to happen is that you start gathering as much data as possible, and then you get inundated and overwhelmed with the amount of data that's available. So what we try to say is, it's not about the amount of the data, it's the quality of the data. And what you really need to focus on is the data relevant? Is it accurate? The completeness and timeliness of the data will make it more reliable. And so your data strategy, just as a word of caution for those on the call who are either responsible for creating a data strategy as analysts, or those who are business partners and are harnessing the data, what we really have to take is a neutral perspective when it comes to the amount of data, and really try to think about is my source right? And is this source of data reliable for me to make the decisions? That's going to be more important, and it's going to prevent you from being a data dragon. Okay. So one aspect about the data, we talked a lot about proprietary data, data that you have internally, customer data, financial data, product data. But what about what the consumers are saying, the primary research data that you're consistently collecting to get more educated about your end user? So we call that, a part of our analytics team is also the insights team. And what the insights team is really responsible for is really trying to connect the what to the why. And what I mean by that is, data by itself does not provide any value. But when you start connecting the different pieces of data and you start making decisions that are actually actionable and tied to the business, that's when the magic happens. So when we think about data, it's just not proprietary data. It's also data that you gather from the market, from consumers directly. And so what we call that is insights. And there are three different aspects of collecting primary research data. You can have market intelligence. So yes, there is secondary resources that are available, but you yourself could be conducting quantitative research studies that help you understand the voice in the market. What are competitors saying? What's happening in the industry that is revolutionizing technology, for example, or within categories where your product exists? We call that market intelligence, being ahead of your competition. Customer intelligence is when you're consistently trying to understand user needs and pain points, and you're staying not only understanding what the users are saying, but why they are saying it. What is the context within which they live, that we can continue to empathize and make our products customer centric. And then as you go down the path of actually developing a product, we work very closely with our design team as they start developing prototypes and concepts to actually test those to make sure that they are consistently meeting user expectations. And again, we use a variety of quantitative and qualitative techniques to make sure that we are conducting UX testing. So these three really constitute your insights team. And what I'm presenting to you is really an industry standard way of really thinking about primary research. I will say that from my experience, CPG backgrounds and retailers are really, really adept at managing proprietary data along with primary research data and constructing teams to really support the design, strategy, and technology teams. Okay. So what's it like to be data-driven? We believe that we want to shift the mindset from being data-driven to insights-driven. We just talked about multiple sources of data. And like I said, again, the idea of being data-driven has been thrown around for a very, very long time. Everybody wants to be a data-driven organization. But data by itself does not have any inherent value. What we really need to do is shift the mindset from being data-driven to insights-driven to actually make actionable decisions. Okay, so next slide, please. I just wanted to take a step back and really talk about how you think about data. So the first phase is, when we talk about the pyramid, at the most bottom level, you have data, which is your raw, unprocessed facts that are lying somewhere in some system. Somebody is creating some spreadsheet, but that is just raw data. But data, when it's harnessed, especially when you think about proprietary data, that's when you start analyzing it. So data analytics starts converting raw data to understanding what is happening. We still don't know why it's happening. We have some hypotheses, and based on our past experience, maybe we can decipher some of the gaps that we're seeing in the information, but we're just trying to understand what we are seeing. When you start uncovering the why and you start combining owned data with primary sources of data, trend data, that is when you really start understanding, why is this consumer behaving this way? Or why did we get this product review? Why aren't consumers engaged on my website when I have spent so much time driving engagement, right? So that is when you start understanding the why, and it's the why that creates the magic. So again, what we want to emphasize is that when you're trying to becoming a data-driven organization, you need to start somewhere, harness your data, build a data strategy. But the magic happens when you start connecting the dots and start making sense of it. And that is what insights provides you. Okay. So what are the benefits of really becoming insights driven? We will say that first, it provides a very, very holistic perspective. It definitely helps. And what I mean by that, by holistic perspective, is that when you think about really layering all the different pieces of data into something that is actually actionable, you have a well-rounded understanding of the internal and the external work. So it does provide you a holistic perspective. You are not leaving any stone unturned, but you're providing a much more comprehensive perspective to something. It helps with informed planning. And again, what we mean by that is, as analysts, we're constantly looking, we have to have an understanding of what has happened, but we're also looking ahead, and we have to have a foresight so that when we are working with strategy and we are working with other partners within the organization, we can provide an insights-driven, consumer-centric decision-making. And so as you work with the cross-functional team, you need to be informed about different aspects about the consumer, but also about the market to provide that perspective. And then finally, it leads to organizational agility and innovation. And what I mean by that is that when the organization is constantly harnessing data, it gives you a bigger sense of confidence to not only work through what you have in front of you, your existing challenge, but be proactive and consistently thinking about innovation in areas where competitors are not thinking about. So it makes your organization much more agile, much more innovative. I can say that having worked at 3M for a long period of time, that organization has really infused agility and innovation within the organization. And that begins with harnessing data. Okay. And then benefits of being insights driven, just in summary, is that insights activation has unique benefits. And so it does provide a very comprehensive view into the organization. It makes you more responsible of the data that you have, but also it gives you responsible of the consumer needs and pain points. And it's when you start making those connection points, you will become more confident in being an insights driven organization. The next slide just gives you the validation, from other sources of information that we are constantly harnessing to really, again, show value in how it's going to impact the organization. So when you are an insights-driven organization, you are 1.7 times more likely to report improved ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. So like I said, you're proactive towards market needs. You're 1.5 times more likely to actually report increased customer lifetime value. Customers are more likely to stay with organizations who are truly, confident and consistently being on top of understanding their changing needs. And then finally, on the right-hand side, they're also more likely to report that they actually are growing as a function, because like I said, you're not just addressing the issue at hand and growing your existing categories, but you're always looking newer places to innovate and grow your business. Okay. So I'm going to hand it off to Bridget now, and Bridget is going to walk you through just how do you begin using data effectively within your organization.
All right, so hopefully we have convinced you that being insights driven is a worthwhile practice for your organization. So the next step is figuring out how to get there. This section, then, we're going to look at how you can use data effectively to generate insights by looking at where insights fits into the product life cycle, and then some best practices for setting goals within your research practice. So here we have, and hopefully you've heard of this before. If not, no worries. You may be familiar with the concept of the product life cycle, which describes the stages that both digital and physical products generally move through. If you are coming from more of a CPG background, there may be, your experiences might be slightly different, but this process holds pretty consistent across those products. And so the diagram that we have here really extends those stages to kind of show how new product ideas might be drawing from larger business strategy, and how existing products are ideally subject to kind of ongoing optimization or research practices. Frequently, we find that useful data is going to be created before we even enter this life cycle. It's also going to be produced continuously during this life cycle. And so different parts of the business or different domains are going to own different data. And one of the benefits of including your insights researchers throughout this process is that we have an unbiased perspective, and we don't necessarily feel the same ownership over these different components. So ideally, we will be better at providing high quality data that doesn't necessarily validate a particular perspective. So we have the potential to do that. Now, of course, most organizations, they're not free from politics. And sometimes this information is siloed, but bringing in your insights researchers or an insights team will help you kind of work through that to produce the best information that you can for your org. And then one of the key steps here that is often overlooked and refers back to what Sameera was talking about at the beginning is that oftentimes organizations have a lot of information that they can start with. So in very few instances will you generally be starting from scratch. There will be information you can review, and that, of course, is going to be a highly cost-effective way of informing your strategy. It also is an important way of ensuring that you create buy-in across your business units. They feel like they've been heard. They feel like their contributions are part of this process. From there, especially as we talk about product development, next, we're going to look at data that should be used to assess customer needs and pain points. So understanding those motivations or frustrations really helps us define some opportunities for solutions. Similarly, understanding the broader context is important. It can be really helpful for understanding how we might approach different solutions, right? We may see an opportunity, but having more contextual information may help us see how to do it. And then finally, in the later stages, research often focuses on evaluation of the product to identify areas for improvement or expansion. And then this is, of course, critical because it ensures that we're optimizing and meeting our customers' needs where they're at and helping our products stay relevant with periodic updates. So then as part of this, we're going to take a quick look at the research process overview. We've seen where the data fits into the broader product lifecycle, but how do you use data within those stages? Here, we've got the major stages for how you might move through the research process. Today's presentation is really going to focus on 2 of these steps. It's not that they're not all important, but given the time, we're going to be focusing primarily on writing research objectives and then sharing and applying insights. But the first step in this cycle is identifying business goals, which ensures that whatever research study we're designing, program that we're designing, ultimately aligns with the broader needs of the business. From there, then, we will be writing research objectives and translating those business goals into individual studies that are, objectives that are clear, specific, and achievable. From there, we would then determine whatever method is most appropriate to find that information. And then if there are researchers in the audience, obviously number 4, the 4th step is our favorite, actually going out, gathering, and analyzing that data to produce those insights for the business. And then finally, the last step, sharing and applying those insights. So ensuring that all members of the business have the opportunity to know what we've been working on and how they can apply that information themselves. Okay. From here, then, we consider why are research objectives something that matters for us. Research objectives ultimately define what you intend to learn from a particular study, and developing formal research objectives ensures, first, alignment to business objectives. Research, depending on the maturity of your organization, can require a lot of investment, and so it is critical that we stay anchored in a specific business priority. While research in and of itself is fun, research for research's sake isn't always beneficial to everyone else, right? Next, having those clear objectives ensures that we have team alignment. Ideally, we're developing our objectives in partnership with members of a cross-functional team that can speak to this. And doing this ensures that our objectives reflect stakeholders' perspectives and can also help build some of that buy-in so that different teams feel like the scope of their work has been seen and is properly understood. Next, a good research objective has the potential for actionable recommendations. By laddering up to our strategy and aligning with our teams, research objectives should focus on gaining knowledge that is likely to result in something that we can act on. We want to ensure that we're creating research objectives that allow us to develop insights that are granular enough to be clear to our cross-functional teams, but also broad enough that they can be impactful and be applied throughout the business. Lastly, a research objective needs to be feasible, right? We need a feasibility of assessing this. So we need to have clear metrics associated with the objectives that we develop. They should be clear and attainable, and this is often the point where teams may find it difficult to communicate because there's the tendency with research and the development of objectives to really want to boil the ocean. We want it all. It's all important. And yes, it technically is, but each individual study is not going to answer every question. So it's at this point that we're really trying to narrow our focus to ensure that whatever insights we are able to develop are truly actionable and beneficial for the business. Okay. So taken all together, this sounds very lofty. So in practice, what might the process of drafting a research objective actually look like? And this is a process that we use at Nerdery. You may be familiar with it in your own businesses or disciplines, but it first starts with, again, determining those priority business goals. This is at the broadest level, and we are not looking for these in isolation. Research is looking for help from the rest of the business to ensure that we've understood their needs. Next, we're going to assess existing knowledge and hypotheses to help us avoid redundant work, right? If we have this information, let's leverage that rather than reinventing the wheel. Next, we want to align the team on the purpose of the research, which is essentially we need to help identify some team goals. What do members and other functions need to know to do their work effectively? And then next, we need to limit those objectives to things that are feasible and likely to result in actionable knowledge. So again, we want to make sure that our objectives are specific so that they can be measurable, but also still keeping in mind that we want to have results that can be applied a bit more widely than just one, particularly one potential team. And so when it comes to doing this, what might it look like in practice? So for our example here, maybe we have found that in general, we really want to improve the customer satisfaction with our company's website or our e-commerce website. With what we do know, our existing information tells us that in general, they are unhappy with the checkout process. And so as part of aligning with our team, right, so talking with internal stakeholders, we learned that they seem to be unhappy with the checkout process, and then looking to our cross-functional team, how might we do this? And so as part of looking at this, they help us to limit those objectives, limit our view in terms of what we might seek to understand. So some of the considerations we might have here are, what do customers find annoying and confusing about the current online process? What do they expect from the online checkout? What about experiences with competitors, maybe influencing how they expect this process to go? What do they like about those processes? And so once we have those kind of objectives drafted, we would then move on to the next part, which would of course be determining the appropriate methods to write a research plan. Again, we're not necessarily going to be getting into that in this particular presentation because it's kind of outside of the scope. But once you have identified the objectives that you're interested in, then we would use methods that are most appropriate to finding those answers. That would bring us to step 3 in our process, of course. But for right now, we are actually going to jump to the end of the process. So assuming you've got your objectives and then you've carried out your study and analyzed it, now it's time to share and apply the insights. So the outputs of research can take a lot of forms, and whatever shape they take, we want to ensure that the information is presented in a way that is actionable and conveyed in a way that convinces our audience that they can effectively use it. And so an example of this might be something like mapping the current state. So a current state journey illustrates the actions that our consumers take or stages that they go through. And so we can map the current state for all kinds of things, right? It can be for actions as small as deciding to download an app, or something as potentially large or complex, as we've got an example of here, which would be seeking treatment for a major medical condition. Typically, the way we build these is across the very top, we'll have the key steps in the current experience. And then down the left-hand side, we'll highlight the specific actions, needs, the pain points or roadblocks associated with each of these steps. And all of this is meant to help kind of reflect our understanding of our end users' current experiences. And then once we have those all kind of stacked on top of each other, at the very bottom, you'll see this slot for opportunities. And we do it this way because seeing those actions, needs, pain points kind of stacked on top of one another really helps us to see where the gaps in the experience are, where the biggest points of difficulty are for our users. So it helps make it easier to see what potential solutions could help to address this. Also, in terms of helping to communicate this information cross-functionally, having things layered this way allows for those different business units to see where they fit in the process and how they might help to build a better solution to solving our consumers' needs. So research outputs, again, can take a lot of forms. This is something we do very commonly. You may have heard of things like personas or things of that nature. That's also a very common output. But choosing to map the current state this way is one of the easiest ways to communicate insights to the whole business in a way that helps them see how they might also be impacting the consumer experience. And then, of course, having the opportunity to communicate with the whole business is great. And it's important that we place some emphasis on making information digestible and readily available, because ultimately we, the researchers, are generally not the individuals who are going to be the ones who make the major decisions based on the insights. So we want to make sure that information is clear and accessible to the stakeholders in our organization. And part of doing this, of course, then is helping to build those collaborative relationships between research and insights and the rest of the organization. We want to make sure that we are accounting for the perspectives of our stakeholders, but also from research's side, we really want our stakeholders to tell us when the outcomes of our research have really helped to shape their actions and shape their strategies, because it helps to ensure that, you know, as we say in consulting, close the loop, right? All of the information continues to circulate, and then teams will be more likely, ideally going forward, to work with one another to ensure that we can really implement iterative research. It also means that everyone kind of has an influence on the research process. So depending on your role, even if you aren't necessarily formally a research person or insights person, you may have influence or a set of skills that are ultimately important to applying those insights. Now, as part of building this broader kind of collaborative environment, one of the things we need, especially if organizations maybe don't have a full insights or research function built out, we need internal champions. And these are going to be those individuals that ultimately help us ensure that any insight strategy is successful, because they help support the collaboration as well as any cross-functional relationships that are necessary to do this. And so how do you identify a champion? Or you might be the champion. One of the first important criteria is receptiveness. So regardless of their knowledge or experience with research, champions ultimately see its value. And as such, they are really interested in the potential for insights to guide that decision-making or that informed planning. One of the ways they do this is ultimately by having connections and being broadly involved in the organization. So while it's not inherently necessary that an internal champion have seniority, if they do have seniority, this is going to be something that they can more effectively support. Champions are going to be able to bridge the gap across domains. So they're going to help research speak to business, strategy, design, and IT. And so they would be responsible for using their existing relationships to help us implement the Insights program and promote or evangelize any results of that Insights program. And then finally, as part of that evangelizing, they're going to have the greatest opportunity to help us leverage insights. Champions, and this is in part why seniority is likely a common criteria for an effective champion, they need to be in a position to really use insights and advocate for the role of those insights. Ideally, these individuals are going to both, they're going to be able to implement and promote and encourage other business units to continue participating in the process and ensuring that we can work iteratively as we complete these projects. Because ultimately, making our research strategy more iterative ensures that our products stay up to date and consistently meet our consumer needs. Okay. Lastly, as part of this collaboration and finding those internal champions, everyone ultimately has a role to play in insights, but it's important to note that those roles are going to vary. A critical piece of an effective insight strategy is learning to conduct quality research. And that is a skill that is honed over many years. And it's critical often, most importantly, because we don't often notice a lack of quality in a research project until the results are there. And then we see, maybe something was not quite what we anticipated. And so we always encourage bringing in an insights team, because we have that special skill set that ensures that we are appropriately narrowing the research objectives and selecting the appropriate method, as well as communicating those insights as effectively as possible. So quality insights depends on a quality process. And if you have the option in your organization, leaning on those research specialists is a great way to ensure high quality results. Also, speaking as a researcher for cross-functional teams, My doing the research with my years of training ensures that all of the members of the team are going to receive high quality results, while also retaining their own time and energy to more effectively implement those results in their respective domains. But that said, all of us together, everyone has a role in this process. There are going to be those who are going to be most responsible for advocating for research in the product life cycle. There's also going to be those who help translate and apply those results. Okay? So all of this is critical in building an effective insights-driven organization. And from here, to help demonstrate this broader process, we're going to present 2 case studies. So I'll hand it back to you, Sameera.
Thanks, Bridget. So I think by now you guys might have understood different sources of data, but also how do you even begin this journey on being an insights-driven organization? So we have 2 case studies here to really sort of help you understand 2 different case studies. One for those organizations that have an insights team and they have the internal resources or do have a lot of data. How do you harness it? And there are some organizations that really want to get started on this journey. So hopefully these 2 examples will give you some insight on how you can implement some of these nuggets in your organization. Okay, so the first case study, this case study was for an organization that we were working with who was in the construction industry. And they had very limited sources of data. As we all know, the construction industry is a pivotal industry within our life, but they have their own systems and their own ways of working that might not be on par with other sophisticated companies, but they equally see the value in being an insights-driven organization. But how do they get started? And so the first thing we did was we first started with harnessing the customer data. And we had additional information on their financial data or even the specific products that they were selling or the services that they were selling. But one of the biggest missing link was really that empathy with their end users. They were very conversant with how the needs of the end users have shifted and changed. So we began with first understanding their internal perspective. And so we conducted stakeholder interviews to gauge that internal perspective and then validated that with additional research. So we conducted, user interviews as well as discussion boards to really try and understand the user needs and pain points amongst people who are in the construction industry, but also contractors. After we got this rich feedback, we also tried to understand, as they are interacting, not only what they need and what they want from this company, but also as they're interacting with different kind of systems and platforms, what are their pain points? What are their friction points as they're trying to navigate different order processing methodologies or placing an order or getting in touch with the right person within the company to order supplies? What are the different systems that they're really touching? So like I said before, when you're building your data strategy, it's not a singular source of data. What we try to do is hear the customer, understand the internal perspective, look at how they are using the systems from a usability standpoint. It was the combination of all this information that we mapped into a current state journey map. This was similar to the map that Bridget walked you through, which really, again, focused on what are the needs, what are the pain points, what are the systems and processes they're using today, what are their struggles on a day-to-day basis in accessing those systems. And the way this journey map became even richer is because it was a highly collaborative process of champions. We had the design team as well as a tech team contributing to that current state map based on different solutions that they have observed that could solve those pain points from a technical standpoint as well as from a design and experience standpoint. And then we ideated against these white space opportunities or these pain points and how would we be able to solve this in a unique way. Again, this was not just done by insights. When you think about ideation and prioritization, it's best if it's a collaborative approach between the design team, the strategy team, and the tech team, all looking at the pain point and coming up for solutions based on their background. And then the design team defined a future state map. So they took all this information from the current state, we ideated, and then the design team said, okay, if we were to bring this to life from a digital experience standpoint, what would that be? So it was really a combination of empathizing with the current state, but also leveraging our extended team's value in understanding the experience and understanding what this new world could be to define a future map. So I'm not saying that their data strategy or their journey is complete. It's basically they're putting the building blocks in place so that they can get to a more insight-driven organization, starting with empathizing with their end user. Okay. The next example is for a healthcare provider, a very large healthcare provider who actually had lots and lots of data. They were inundated with data, patient data, provider data, they had their financial data, and they really wanted to revolutionize the way their patient experience was coming through within their provider network. They wanted to rethink the way, just the way when we walk into a mall and we walk into a store to shop, we're excited. But when we walk into a hospital or when we're trying to interact with a healthcare service provider, it's not an exciting time for us. They wanted to completely change that. And again, because they were sitting on a lot of data, we first didn't assume that conducting primary research would be the solve. We first focused on the what. What is the existing patient data do they have access to? What are the different types of data do they have? Since they have so much different data coming from the insurance companies, coming from their own providers, how is it migrated across the different services? Meaning the cardiology department versus a gynecology department. What are the different sources of data that's available across their key departments? And then finally, what is the retention rate? What's the patient ROI? Again, those are all a mix of product metrics and financial metrics and customer data all coming together to build a data strategy. We also looked at market data. So we looked at secondary data from a competitive standpoint. What are some healthcare services, provider services that are doing a really good job in improving the patient experience? Does not have to be just within the United States. Could it be international? Could we gain inspiration outside of not just the healthcare system, but other industries such as apparel and retail, which are really focused on consumer experience? And so we brought, again, outside in thinking into really assessing what is it that we know about the patients today. Then we identified those gaps, and that is when we conducted primary research. And the primary research included patient interviews. We also conducted quantitative research to really understand there are so many needs of the patients and so many different types of patients. What are the most important needs that come up over and over again, regardless of the kind of patient you are? We again mapped it into a journey map because a journey map really gives you an overview of everything that you've been seeing and hearing in a very cohesive way. So we mapped that. This is all current state. This is not solutioning or finding an idea. We also converted these problem statements into jobs to be done. Like, what is the outcome of this pain point that we really want to achieve? That is when we then began to create the future journey map. And like I said, that is where design and strategy and tech come into play. And they began to think about solutions, regardless of what the current state is, taking inspiration from the competition and using their own experience to really imagine that future state. So I think what we are trying to say is you might have a lot of data or you don't know what to get started. The building block is always to look what you have internally and then find those gaps and then validate that with additional information. So don't dismiss what you already have. That itself could be extremely valuable.